My name is Ernesto Custodio. I host the Agile Online Meetup. I'm the president of Agile Genesis, and my focus for the past decade has been in the area of distributed team collaboration, in particular, Agile distributed team collaboration. So this latest pandemic and set of incidents has brought about the need for many of us to collaborate online, and I've been engaged in assisting organizations as well as trying to offer help in the community to understand how to make this work effectively for everyone. Yeah, and let us know what you're most interested in covering today and learning about. What is your main interest for being here? And we'll take that into consideration as we go through the material. And might be able to directly answer any questions you have around that. So we're using the Zoom chat today. We're not going to use Miro and other tools in the interest of time, since these sessions tend to be short, but go ahead and type in, what are some of your goals today? I'm going to say learning goals. And I just created a deliberator here where you can go ahead and in the chat, we're going to use the chat significantly here to understand how people are challenged and what type of solutions they're using in this brave new world. Yeah. Again, for those of you that came in a little later, feel free to share your video, feel free to unmute and speak as we go, since we'll have a smaller group today that is good for interaction. Yeah. OKRs, excellent. All right. So go ahead and type in some of those. I'm going to go and set the stage for the fact that Agile is implemented through a set of frameworks, right? The idea that the frameworks are how we implement the mindset of Agile is a significant area for us to align. So what is a framework? Does anyone want to volunteer that? What is a framework? What do we mean by that? When we say the Scrum framework, or if we consider Kanban a framework, or we're applying it as a framework, what do we mean by that? We do have Scrum as scale. SAFe is actually a body of knowledge, to be 100% aligned on their definition. But when we say a framework, what do we mean?
Okay. Well, a framework would be a general structure that works, but would be molded for a group's particular needs.
Yeah, that's a great, thank you for that, Briam. It's exactly that. It is a foundation. It is meant to be this supporting structure that we can fit our processes and techniques into from an organizational standpoint, right? And because of that, the frameworks themselves are purposefully silent on the techniques and the processes for implementation, such as distributed agile. So it's left up to us to kind of figure it out, because it's so unique in many cases to our implementation, right? So in the areas where the frameworks are very helpful by the fact that they allow for flexibility, they do limit us in the area of distributed agile applications because we need more specific guidance. So we're left with the need for understanding what are the challenges, what are the techniques associated with implementing distributed agile, right? When we talk about distributed agile, we're talking about the fact that many of us are right now attending this very session in a distributed manner. We're all remote. We could have various forms of distribution where a few of you are in the office dialing in, but for the most part, the entire group is considered to be distributed because we're meeting on this virtual setting in order for us to do our work and collaborate, right? And when we did the research and looked at the various areas that impact most teams, there were no surprises there. We found that the teams were challenged by the tools and how to collaborate using technology. Okay? We found that the teams were challenged by the various roles and what the responsibility of these roles are. Is there a need for new roles? We found that the teams were challenged by how they execute the events, facilitation techniques, and how to coordinate events, maybe across time zone differences or multiple culture considerations, or just general techniques for being able to do some things. Right? And then we also found that the artifacts were a significant limitation. How to visually radiate these artifacts that maybe existed in a physical form before, such as the product backlog, right? And lastly, people were very hungry for techniques. How do I improve the performance and the collaboration of distributed members, right? Today, we're going to focus on the tool side. As I mentioned, we have about an hour, so we'll stay a little superficial. We do have a class that is specific toward distributed agile collaboration that goes into a much deeper dive into these 5 areas, and that in fact there is one this week that will be happening on Friday. So you have the opportunity to register for that and learn more. And we'll also have additional sessions in the future as far as this webinar series goes in the meetup. Okay. So I mentioned that there are various types of distributed compositions, and they include distributed teams. Those are 2 teams that or more that are located in the office somewhere. They're co-located and they're collaborating remotely between the various teams. That has a particular set of needs and a particular set of solutions because you can see how there's tribal aspects that develop when you're co-located, but you also need to be considerate of that distribution that is happening with the other side. Then there are distributed members, that's such as what we have today, where everyone is attending remotely. And then there are the more common one today, where there's a hybrid application on both. And that is that we might have some teams that are in the office and we might have members dialing in. These take also the form of temporal hybrid distribution, where some of the compositions might change because I'm commuting on Monday, but I might be in the office on Tuesday, right? The other part that affects these is how the teams are using the various technologies. So let's talk about the tool-related challenges and what we see most associated with in regards to those. When we talk about tool challenges, we're talking about a set of groups. And the first set that really jumped out when we were doing the research was this idea that there was a group that related to corporate security and compliance, missing advanced tool features, and the teams just had total information overload. They just were getting hit with all kinds of tools at the same time, and they couldn't quite get fixed around what tools they were going to use and which one was the best tool to use, and did that tool meet the corporate needs, in particular in the area of security. The common solution to that is to establish a tool advisory board or a tab. This is a corporate group. Now, if you're in a small organization, that's okay too. You can establish a set of individuals or even a individual that can act in this capacity that pretty much sets the standards, of course, taking feedback from the teams and taking feedback from the organization and from legal in terms of, hey, what are the corporate security compliance policies that we need to meet? Which tools meet that? And also, more importantly, a lot of the tools, a lot of the team members were challenged by the fact that the tools did not have the features that they needed. How many of you are in a situation where you might want to use Zoom because you like the breakout sessions, but you're stuck with maybe using Teams where the breakout sessions are limited? And I say limited because they recently introduced some breakout functionalities. Does that resonate with anyone? Yeah, that type of limitation. Yeah, I'm getting Joel is experiencing that. It's a very, very common problem. We do have the tools, and corporate does understand that, hey, you've got the tool that you need to do the job, go and do the job, but then we're limited by how that tool performs. So there's a need to make sure that we're going out and seeking advice and getting that information back to that tab. So the tab needs to constantly collaborate with the team members. And by tab, I mean the tool advisory board, in order to put that through the process to establish that which we're all using, and that is the governance of the tool. There's a need for governance that is established by the tab, right? And at the same time, that goes with the information overload. What we found is that it was actually more advantageous to have less tool choices than more tool choices. Team members and teams were being challenged by the amount of tools that they had options to use, and different individuals were going and using different tools. Then if the tools were streamlined to a handful of those where you were able to pick the right one for the right job and everyone else was doing the same, right? The other set of challenges, it revolved around this aspect of the need to be familiar with the tools, the educational aspect. So many tool members were not, many team members were not familiar with regards to how to use the tool. They had low tool efficacy. They were figuring it out on their own. So they were using ad hoc methods to get to different ways or different things. If you're in Jira, maybe you were using 2 different types of reports, and those reports were showing different things depending on. So that the idea that we were sort of rigging the tool to do what we wanted to without a consistent approach was a significant challenge. And the same thing relating to which tools we used, right? So many team members were not familiar with some of the collaboration capabilities of the tool, so they resorted to using emails. And that provided significant limitations, right? Email overload. We also saw the same tool being used for 2 different things, where you end up with split information because of those choices. The solution to that was to organize a community of practice so that the proper information continued to be cemented, that individuals felt that they had access to the proper training, to the proper coaching to use the tools. The communities of practice and the Agile practice were in charge and responsible for bringing in the trainers or creating cross-collaboration or cross-training opportunities, having brown bag sessions, having demos on that were specific to the tools. All of these things under one umbrella. There was a community of practice to disseminate information about tool usage and other aspects in Agile, by the way, very advantageous in the other areas that we'll touch in the upcoming sessions. Okay? The other part of tools or challenges were around this need for technical help, technical support. The individuals had lack of access, and that lack of access might have not necessarily been all technical. It could also have been that the organization bought the wrong type of license, for example. And that meant that only a handful of individuals had access to the tool, and now it didn't serve the purpose of visually radiating or having everyone collaborate using the same tool, right? Speaking of information radiation, unable to locate information was a big problem. If you are using a tool like Raleigh and you had to go in and find that information in there, you would have to navigate various screens to get to that area. And that might not be the quickest way for you to consume the information. So there was a need for a common set of sources of information, meaning the artifacts that everybody agreed to using, and how those were presented in a friendly way that wasn't overwhelming, right? And then the last one was this area of technical problems, very pronounced. A lot of individuals having technical problems, whether they were related to firewall, whether they're related to various aspects that the tools provided a limitation for security purposes or other areas, or just synchronization issues, right? Slow synchronizations across server was a common one. This required individuals to form a specific role. This role was the tool administrator or the TA, having a designated individual that is coordinating with the tab, with the tool advisory board, so that they're able to collaborate together. But that individual was the first point of defense for the team if they had any problems relating to access, any problems related to technical problems. And there's another item in there that is unable to locate information that is around this area of having the right tool and building the right boards in a digital form that allows for that information radiator to happen. And we're going to cover that when we get to the artifact sessions in the future, or if you attend the class, where we are actually creating those artifacts in Miro and providing a large board with all of the elements that were common in our physical environment in a way that actually worked better than when we were in the office, because we create a synchronization between that visual board and tools like Jira, for example, where there's a link already, there's no need to re-enter the information. I found that even in the office, when we were all co-located, sorry about that, we were beginning to use the tool. Hold near reader. Voiceover off. Sorry about that. We were beginning to use, Siri wants to jump in on this as well. We were beginning to use the tools that were digital to us because that transfer of information between the physical and the digital was becoming an overhead. So the problem that always occurred was that in the digital form, there was no visual radiator. So we worked significantly on implementing that in a way that works for both the physical environment as well as the distributed environment. Okay. So with these, and we have more to cover, but I want to pause here for a second. And I'm going to put a delineator here and say which ones are the ones that impact you the most. And I created a chat delineator here that I'm going to put out, and it says impacted by the most, right? So which of these challenges are resonate the most with you in your environment? Go ahead and type that into the chat. And this is a good pause. I've been talking a lot, but want to also come back to the folks on the call. I know that folks are shy. We didn't do an intro and didn't warm up in that regard, but you're in a safe place. Go ahead and type in some of the things that are challenging you the most that may pertain to these 9 categories or maybe other areas, right? So we see that we have inconsistent use of tool features. So that's a common one. Thank you for sharing that, Peter. So yes, the idea that there's a significant need for us to train and coach on how to use the tool in accordance to how the rest of the team members are using it is significant. Notice that I didn't say the right way, because it might just be that we're both doing it, but we're doing it differently. And it's a matter of alignment, and a community of practice within the organization can help with that, right? The TA. So JT, is that the TA as a solution, something that has helped you, or is that the TA or the lack of TA where you're feeling the pain of that?
The ignorance of technical debt.
Oh, technical debt. I'm sorry. I'm reading it as a tool administrator. Gotcha. So the technical debt that is surfacing as a result of maybe not addressing some of the collaboration advantages that you can build, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's common. So these are the symptoms that we begin to feel as we are not able to maximize collaboration. So it's important that we attack these very, very, very vigilant, very diligently, if that's a word, in a way that is part of our continuous improvement, putting these items in retrospectives and ensuring that each iteration we're able to systematically move through those, because they are going to show up in other areas, whether that is in technical debt, or whether that is in teams essentially disconnecting and not being as engaged more and more, right? All right. Let's talk a little bit about communication, which are the areas where we tend to be most challenged. And how do we, so let's give you a few techniques around these, right? So how do we communicate? One of the solutions that help in getting the teams to align around the use of tools is a TWA, or a team working agreement. How many of you have recently revisited your team working agreement, your TWA? You might not have one. And if you do, tell us about whether you have revisited that since, let's say, in this year, right? Since we all started collaborating remotely. Yes or no would do if you have not revised your team working agreement. Let us know how you're doing there. I have revisited when we went remote. Very good. Excellent. Excellent. Good move, Jody. Your team working agreement is critical in a remote environment. Distributed teams, distributed agile teams need to agree on various elements. One of them is in the use of tools. And how does that translate? Well, I've worked in various organizations, and different organizations have different ways of using tools. This is how we worked in a past organization. We had our wikis, bulletins, such as Confluence, and we just posted things there. These were things that we were interested in sort of announcing in terms of the general population. If you saw it, great. If you didn't, we're not going to hold you accountable for what was in the board, right? The second was, well, using tools like Jira or Rally, our project management tools, right? Now, Azure is very common as well. I'm seeing a significant adoption increase in Azure. This is Ernesto's observation in terms of tool usage. It was that Rally was significantly popular. I'm seeing Rally being used less and less. And Jira, of course, is king. So I see Microsoft with a significant rise. Jira is still the most common one that I see. And tools like Rally and version 1, not to say they might have different statistics in the organizations that own these tools. Simply, my observation has been that I've seen less use of these, right? But we had Jira, and we used it for purposes of posting our work-related updates, right, in the form of cards. So that was a form of communication, because you knew that I was working on a task and I owned that task. And if I completed that task, I changed the status, and now you knew that I was done working on that and it was ready for the next phase. That's a form of communication, right? And then there's email. So I'm seeing here, currently use ADO. So I'm not as familiar with ADO. Joel, are you brave enough to tell us about that? Are you with us, Joel?
It's Azure DevOps, it's ADO.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, a lot of background noise here.
Got it. I'm sorry. Perfect. And I see that you wrote it in. Yes, Azure is significantly getting more and more more play and adoption, and it's having a lot to do with the new adoption of DevOps as well, how well it integrates it into the pipeline. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Awesome. Email is another form of communication, still quite alive. We use it a lot. When we send an email, we expect a reply, but that is up to you when you're able to get to that, right? These forms of communications are what we call asynchronous communication, right? They are not happening at the same time. We send things out and we expect some kind of response to that, but we're not sure when and if that will happen, depending on which particular tool we're using to communicate, right? The other form of communication is synchronous communication. And synchronous communication is that which is happening in real time. It's fair to say that it's happening in near real time, right? Because we have things like instant messaging, which you might see that I'm online, you Slack me, and if I'm online and available, as the tool says, I will reply. And we're now establishing a real-time communication, but I might walk away to the kitchen, get a cup of coffee, and reply to you after you pasted something. So there's a bit of a delay there. So it's near real time. But we use it more for casual encounters, right? Hey, was that code checked in? Hey, how are you coming along with that, which we talked about yesterday, right? All of these are very casual ways of reaching out to individuals. It's the least formal of the synchronous communication. The second one that we use often is video conferencing. We're doing it here. We're doing it now. That is how we tend to formalize things. When we set up a meeting and we invite people and we have a discussion, this is ensuring that individuals are aware of what that message was and that we got their buy-in to that message, or we actually are meeting with a purpose, right? And then last, this is interesting because the phone is to some degree less effective than video conferencing, but we tend to use it for urgent matters, right? And it has to do with reachability. So I can dial you on your mobile, I can dial you in the office phone, which are becoming less and less frequent. But I have a direct access to you because the expectations are that you'll be able to pick up if you are available at all, right? So how these move from the basement to the most urgent part of it is a matter of how our culture in our organization agrees to do that, right? So a team working agreement that addresses the various tools that we will use and where those tools fit into the picture is a good way for us to establish a collaboration cadence. Yeah. So I'm going to come back to our trusting board and I'm going to put in, chat, and I'm going to put, how do you communicate today with your team? Go ahead and type that in, or feel free to come over the microphone and tell us a little bit about that. MS Teams, perfect. Teams, telegrams, or email, or pigeon mail, right? Yeah, we tend to mix various tools. Microsoft Teams is becoming more and more popular as part of what I would consider at this point unified communication is not a messaging, it's not a telephone, it's not a meeting place, but it's rather the unification of all of these put together. Okay. What else we got? Slack, Google Meet sessions. Excellent. How's Google Meet sessions working for you, Briam? If I could put you on the hot seat.
Google Meet is been very flexible, handy, workable. There's early you had said what are some concerns. I would like for people not to get over the bandwidth issues that people say they have that restrict also sharing video. You know, your face is showing, my face is showing. That's a big part of communication. And I've been seeing if there's some other tools out there that have less bandwidth requirements that would still let video. But they've been reliable. It's nice to have that. You can share documents. You can get a lot of work done. And Slack is just, you know, all-purpose, everything, maybe overused, but it's very flexible and handy.
Yeah, that's a great point you bring up. And I'm going to go back on one slide just to keep the material in the forefront. This tab, this tool advisory board, when we do a deeper dive into these, we see the criteria that they're considering. I'll give you the one of the elements that address that. We do that in the class, but one of the elements that address this is a new type of policy that revolves around technology enablement for remote workers. The idea that you might have a budget for purposes of having the proper bandwidth or increased bandwidth if you're a full-time telecommuter. So sometimes the answer is not necessarily optimizing or reducing the requirement for bandwidth, but ensuring that individuals have access to at least a baseline when it comes to bandwidth. Now, that's not possible in all cases where we're dealing with global implementations, that they are parts of the world that might not have that kind of bandwidth, or I might live in the mountains where it's difficult to get aligned. But for the most part, ensuring that individuals are getting that bandwidth is part of the responsibility of this tool advisory board, because bandwidth has become the new corner office, right? And we want to make sure that everyone has the right bandwidth in order to collaborate. As far as reducing or the tools that optimize that, there are some tools that do it better than others. I do find that. For my purposes, I find that Zoom and Teams are friendly in that regard. Teams tends to be less bandwidth intensive, but when I use Teams, I tend to use it with a less number of attendees, and I think that has a lot to do with it. In Zoom, I have Zooms with 50, sometimes 100 individuals, and that's significant, right? Anyone else have any thoughts on the tool that may be best optimized for lower bandwidth? Anyone have any thoughts on that? Okay, everyone's being shy, and I get that. We're all coming together for the first time in a bit in this group. Hoping you warm up to it. And again, just to reemphasize, this is a safe place. No wrong answer here. Feel free to jump in and offer some of your thoughts as we go. Okay, and hopefully, Brian, that helps a little bit. Yeah. WebEx. I've used WebEx extensively in the past. And I do have to admit it was very good in terms of bandwidth management. Yeah. Okay, excellent. So now we understand asynchronous and synchronous communication. Let's talk about the different types of tools that we see. We've been throwing around a lot of tools. And if you are in a setting where you are expected to have effective collaboration between the different tools, you want to make sure that you're using at least one of these tools. And these are in the different areas broken up. It's another way of providing you with tool choices that you have available to you, right? So in the area of unified communication, I mentioned that, right? Microsoft Teams, Cisco Sparks. Unified communication is the idea that I can ring you on the phone. I can ring you in a meeting that we come in via video. I can get in touch with you by chat. It has a unification of all of the various elements, right? We talked about project management tools as a form of communication. We need that, right? That whether it be Jira, whether it be Rally, whether it be version 1 or something even simpler like Trello, right? Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Brian. I was going to bring up that there are some bandwidth comparisons for the various tools, and you put one up there. So yes, thank you for that. I'm sorry, there was a question, yeah?
Yeah, sorry, I mentioned in the chat. Is this possible to get the copy of these slides?
We will make them available as part of the recording in the meetup. So you will have that in the meetup as part of that that visual that is in the recording. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Would it be possible to have a PDF of that?
Yes, I'll share a PDF as well of what we have. Yeah.
Bless you. Thank
Sure
you.
thing. I'll make a note of that, JT.
Thank you kindly.
Excellent. Collective development. This one is very particular. It's assuming that you're using software in terms of the tool choices. So forgive me if you're not developing software in the product area. But if you are, these are some of the examples in terms of that collective development, right? And there's Azure. You might be using things like Puppet and other tools. So make sure that you're covered in that regard as well if it's a software development environment. Web conferencing and video, well, we're doing one right now. This is it. It's Zoom, right? You have WebEx, you have Teams. A lot of people don't know that Amazon has a solution. That is Amazon Chime. GoToMeeting, I found that GoToMeeting had a significant amount of innovation and development, and then it sort of slowed down a little bit in the past few years. So I'm seeing less adoption of that. And then Ring Central, which is offering a Zoom-like solution. It was very, very similar to Zoom, is also another choice. So offering you some additional alternatives here. We've defaulted to Zoom because it's very generous and it's free licensing. But there are others, such as Brian mentioned. Also, there's Google and other options as well. Right? Knowledge sharing. It's important that you check the box on knowledge sharing. That is your wiki type of posting, whether you're using Confluence, whether you're using MS SharePoint, whether you're using some kind of Google document or Google Docs to do that. Make sure that you have a common form of collecting and reflecting on that information or that knowledge. The other is instant messaging. So if you have unified communication, you have instant messaging. Slack could be considered also a part of unified communication. Now you're able to call each other, but for the most part, the free version of Slack does have limitations on that, but it depends on how you're implementing it, right? So take that with a grain of salt. Slack might be either category, but do have an instant message solution available to your team for that casual communication we talked about, right? And then there's the collaborating and whiteboarding. I'm going to reserve that for last. Let me jump over to events and activities. The events and activities are many. These are but just a handful of examples, right? If you are doing retrospectives and you're looking for fun ways to do that, Fun Retro, I think it's a great place. It almost does it a disservice with that name because now it's become more than that. It's a form of allowing you to collaborate, have voting, and other ways to carry out a retrospective. It is focused on retrospective. Tasty Cupcakes, again, it's another one that gives us a lot of ideas on how to have engaging events, in particular in the area of retrospective. So check that out. Pointing Poker is interesting to me. I like it for its simplicity. It's a very, very simple website. You go there, it's free. It's supported through donations. And the minute you go in it, you can start a planning poker session that everyone collaborates. It'll give you a number, a link that has that session number that others can join, and you're playing planning poker immediately without any registrations, and anyone can join as long as they have that link. So very, very useful in how easy it is to use. So if you like it, try it. I get no commission. In fact, I don't know the owners, but I highly encourage it. And things like game storming also, if you're looking for fun ideas to keep your teams interactive. I try to pick different examples here for the different types of categories that might relate to the various events and that you're holding. Okay. On the area of whiteboarding, I reserved it for last because it's one of those areas where distributed teams tend to be challenged the most. And I'll have to say, it's one of the categories that has evolved the fastest in the last year. It's made leaps and bounds in terms of features and functionality, and also in adoption. Tools like Miro or Miro, so that it's not confused with Mural, which are two completely different tools, two separate companies, but they do some very, very similar things. I've also added things like Microsoft Whiteboard. I could literally launch a whiteboard right now in my Windows, if you have Windows, and we can start collaborating. I can invite you into that whiteboard. It's part of your OS. You might need to install it from the Microsoft Store, but it's free and it works very, very well for quick whiteboarding sessions. My favorite is actually Miro. Miro is very, very powerful. And I am using it today in various capacities for brainstorming, but also for visual radiators, and have started and been working on creating a library that is specific to Agile distribution. That is part of what we go through in the class, how to create that library for yourself and kind of use those elements in a way that make it work for the team. So whiteboard collaboration, very, very useful. If you don't have a tool for your team today that allows you to do that, check out Miro. They have a free version. Check out Mural. They also have a free version. Is that right? I'm not sure. I have a paid version for both. Forgive me if Mural does charge, but I don't think it does. I'm not sure. Sorry. Miro does have both. Yes,
Miro,
Google Jamboard.
Sorry, Mural, you can get a month trial.
Mural gives you a month trial. Is that right?
Yeah.
A 30-day? Okay, thank you for that,
correct.
Jamie. I couldn't
And if
remember.
you ask, you get an additional one. They will push it to another month.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
No problem.
It's been a while. I really tested both out. In the end, I still have my Mural account, and I use it for when individuals are familiar with that tool more than the others, because I'm working with various organizations. But when I have my choice, I default and go to Mural. I find it to be a lot more intuitive, right? And in the class, we use Miro and walk through all of the various functionalities that it has, and we use it as a way of having engagements. We'll do that in the future sessions as we continue through these as well. Okay? In terms of, and in that respect, I see also from the comments, we have, oh yeah, so Nuriva Span Workspace. Thank you for that, JT. So are you still using Nuriva? I thought they recently segued out of software only and we're going into embedded hardware. I could be wrong, but I thought they were end of lifing that in the next, if they haven't already. By your comment, I'm assuming that they're still active, right? If that's the case, just do a quick search. Be careful if you put in too many, and if I'm right, be careful if you put in too many assets in there, because you might need to move them out, since they might be in some form of EOL today, right? Google Jamboard, Joel, is another one, and it's also free. Yes, thank you for that. You do have the option. Google does have a good amount of collaboration techniques and a lot of tools. And a lot of organizations have the full suite available to them. I find them to be available in the smaller organizations. Forgive me if you're in a larger one and you're using Google. My observations has been that the enterprise isn't, it's not as common. I find that smaller organizations are more likely to have a Google suite use and adoption, and that's okay. They work very well, right? When you do use Mural or Miro, you will find that the real-time interactivity that it has is very engaging. So I encourage you to look into those as well. Okay. Let's talk about information radiators. It's a very important topic because one of the limitations before we went remote, we had many different types of boards that we tended to take pride in building. And some were small, some were very, very large. These boards were works of art in many cases. And in some cases, they were the central bridge for operations, right? We find that today, the digital version of these is more common than the physical, especially in light of having been forced to work remotely. What the advantage of these boards had is that they offer information radiation. It's an information radiator. Well, it's the idea that as I walked through, and I'm going to get up here just to change the mood a little bit. I'm going to go to my webcam and get up here. I'm going to turn off this fan just to make it, you don't get dizzy. The information radiators are valuable in the area of being able to provide us with information even when we're not seeking it. On our way to the water cooler, we were able to just quickly look and see how teams were doing on whether their burn down was looking in accordance to the estimates, or whether the sprint backlog, or let's call it the sprint board, had the items moving, or anything else, including social boards. We were able to see these things in a very interactive way, just by the fact that we happen to be walking through them. And when we met in front of the board, and it allowed the team to swarm. It allowed us to essentially have a common understanding of what was going on, and for us to visualize without using too many words what we were facing, whether they were bottlenecks, whether they were we were speeding up. All of these things were very, very useful. They tended to be in the form of handwriting. You could have also printed them and placed them. I saw various ways. We were getting to the point where stickies were becoming high tech, and being able to shoot a picture of a sticky and absorb that into a digital form. But then over time, we went more toward the digital. And again, we're going to hit on some of the areas. This is the last part due to our time constraint. But using Miro, using Mural, using any of the whiteboards as a permanent space, that is where your team goes to have that visual radiator, that information radiator, was a key element to making distributed teams work through this period. And those organizations that are being successful today all have one version or another of this type of board. They are almost infinite in their capacity. So designing the board is half art, half science, but having the right the stencils available makes that something that we could all go to. And the leadership is taken to the boards now, as opposed to going to Jira and generating reports. And how many of you have a leadership that take the time to log in and generate the report? That's kind of rare. If you do have that kind of leadership, more power to you, but it tends to be a challenge. So the whiteboards are a way to have simple link. They are secured. You can add a security element to it, and that allows the organization to have more visual radiation. Other alternatives to that are putting the artifacts in a Confluence repository. Other teams are going directly to the project board with Jira or Rally or Azure. And whatever you're using, make sure that when you meet, you are sharing your desktop. Someone is sharing those artifacts so that you're creating that information radiator as individuals are discussing the items. If you have a language barrier within the team, if you have any kind of time zone differences, sometimes even that helps. Cultural understanding, a visual helps a lot. So sharing your desktop is a key element to making that work better. And then your file sharing. Some individuals might have that in a Dropbox or in a box folder where you can just go and find it and open it. The problem is that these other alternatives to the whiteboard, they require you to go find the information. If you're able to create a whiteboard that has that already in it, it's a one-stop shop. So consider that. Okay. So with that, I want to thank you, and I want to also open the floor. We have 1 minute. Any additional questions or comments? I'm seeing on the chat here, product boards are becoming more popular, especially for product owner use, product roadmaps, customer journeys, and personas. Yes, Peter. Thank you very much for adding that. There are many uses of that product board that whiteboard that allow us to just begin to put those elements, and it's a great place for brainstorming as well to some of the topics that you put in, right? Candice is another tool that you use, Joan. I'm not as familiar with Candice, so I'll have to look into that one. Thank you. Make a note here. All right. With that, and to be respectful of your time, I want to thank you. Oh, we do have the class that I mentioned is coming up on February. That's this February. If you want a deeper dive into all of these, we do exercises around that, and you walk away with actual artifacts and knowledge as we share today, as well as the other topics that we have not had a chance to cover yet. So thank you again. Looking forward to seeing you. Have a great week. Okay.
Thanks ever so much.
Thank you all. Have a good one.